Hello, I think we're live. Just gonna go over to Facebook and make sure that everything is in order. And then we're gonna go ahead and get started. I see people are arriving. Welcome. I'm so happy to see you all here today. If you could just let me know where you're watching this from, that would be terrific. Let me know who's in the audience today. That'd be awesome. All right, we're about to get started. Also, let me know where you're watching this from. Are you watching it from YouTube? Are you watching on Facebook? Are you watching on Instagram? I'd love to know. Okay. I think people put questions in a couple of different places. So I'm going to try to find the places where we have the most questions. And then, okay, 1 second. All right, here we go. Okay, I think we're all set. I think we're live on Instagram, so we're ready to go. And we have a nice group of people here, parent of a pre-med at Yale, watching from Michigan. Welcome from Virginia, California, Texas. This is all wonderful. All right, it's great to see everybody. For those of you who don't know me, who may be here for the first time, my name is Dr. Jessica Freedman. I am a physician. I'm an emergency physician. I am a former faculty member at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, where I practiced emergency medicine and where I was on the residency faculty for emergency medicine at the associate residency director level. I also served on the med school admissions committee. I was involved in curricular design for both the residency and ran a course for the medical school. And I have been involved in medical school admissions, medical admissions, residency admissions. This is what I've done for my entire career. I founded MedEdits I think it's about 17 years ago now, 16 or 17 years ago now. And we continue to work with an amazing group of students. And what I have learned over my time learning from all of you, learning from our students, learning about their outcomes, and really just spending all of my time focusing on the trends in medical school, residency, fellowship, medical training has really allowed us to be able to offer phenomenal guidance to our students. And I'm so happy to say that our students are just doing phenomenally well this year. We've had some amazing acceptances, terrific interviews. We've also done great on the residency front. So congratulations to all of you who've just done so unbelievably well this season. We're so, so proud of you. And you've worked so hard. We definitely still have some students who are pushing to get off some key wait lists that they would really like to get off of. And, that's when we really sort of kick things into high gear, to get them off those wait lists. If there's somewhere that they really want to go to where they haven't gotten in yet, and perhaps they're on a wait list. And we're also starting to work with new students for the upcoming season. And so we're, some of you we've known for a while, others of you we're just starting to get to know now. So that's also really, really terrific. So what I'm going to do, I see you're all typing in questions to the Facebook Live, which is terrific. I do ask if people want to post questions in advance in the Facebook group. If you are not part of our Facebook group, I encourage you to join it. It is a private group. It's free. And I'm on the Facebook group regularly answering questions. And we also have some wonderful community members who are really knowledgeable. And obviously everyone can contribute by writing about their own experiences as well. And, nothing's as valuable as someone's personal experience. So we definitely have a lot of great dialogue going on there, and it continues to be terrific. Okay, so I'm going to put these as I answer them. It's possible just because we are starting to get more questions every every live. It's possible I won't be able to get to all of your questions, and I apologize if that's the case. And I do encourage you, if you can, to go ahead and join our Facebook group, and you can always post your questions on the Facebook group. Can you discuss research needed? Why is it needed, and level amount suggested? How does it compare to clinical experience or additional postgraduate work? So in terms of research, for any student who really is aiming to get into an allopathic medical school, whether that's a top tier allopathic medical school or any allopathic medical school here in the United States, research we consider to be a prerequisite. Now, how much research a student has really depends on that individual student's path and what that individual student's focus is, and how they've demonstrated that focus through their experiences, through their coursework, and through their involvement as undergraduates or as postgraduates. So it's not as if we put more weight on one thing versus the other. It really has to do with who you are and who are you as an applicant and where are your strengths. So for example, some of our successful students who get into osteopathic medical schools may have very, very little research. I would say that almost, I don't want to use a double negative here. We have very few students who have no research at all. Some of them may have more than others. Very, very few of our students applying to medical school have no research. That said, we certainly have some students who have very little research compared to others. So for example, we may have a student who, let's say, has between, they've worked in a lab for a year alongside their classes. So maybe they've accumulated a total of, let's say, 200 to 400 hours of research. We have other students who may have been involved in, believe it or not, a couple of research projects, 2 or 3 research projects. And those students are, putting on their application literally thousands of hours of research. And I realize that for some people, that can be super intimidating. In terms of what's most important, research or clinical, they're both important. I can say we've had students who get into medical schools who have more clinical than they have research. We have students who get into those same medical schools who have more research than they do clinical. So medical schools want diverse classes. So, this is why one size does not fit all. And when we're making these recommendations, we're making them individually, depending on a student's background, depending on what their interests are, and depending on what they've already done, and depending on what they're aiming for. So we take all of those things into consideration. Okay. Is it frowned upon to work as an EMT at a summer camp before going back to school because it's for a very short period of time, 6 weeks? If you have an EMT license and you're working at a summer camp, which is a finite period of time where they need medical care, there's nothing that's going to be looked upon negatively about that experience. It's a very favorable experience, and it's, hopefully the student can use that EMT license, at another time, during their pre-med curriculum, their pre-med time. And it's possible when the student lists that experience on AMCAS, if it was only for 6 weeks, depending on how much time they spent and depending on what other experiences they then have when they actually apply as an EMT, it could all be lumped together as, EMT experience at multiple places. So when we're working with students and we're composing their applications and we're figuring out how they're going to highlight their experiences, something that we do is we have them strategically group different experiences if they have too many, right? So AMCAS only allows you 15 experiences. AMCAS is the American College Application Service, which is the allopathic application service. And all medical schools use that except for medical schools in Texas, which use the TMDSAS, the Texas Medical School Application System or Service. I don't know the formal name off the top of my head. TMDSAS is how we know it. So you have 15 opportunities to write about your experiences. So depending on how you spent your time, you may want to group that with other EMT experiences. And that's how we like to, think about these things. Okay. Okay. This is a good question about letters of recommendations. Let me go ahead and put this up. Okay. When are LORs, or letters of recommendation, due for each school? Where can we find this information? What is the best platform for letters of recommendation? So letters of recommendation are due at the same time because we have centralized application services. So ideally, you want your letters of recommendation to be submitted by the middle of June. And this is because your application, and I'm focusing primarily on AMCAS here for the osteopathic application service, and for the Texas application service, it's a little bit different. You ideally want those submitted when you submit your application. But for AMCAS specifically, you want your letter submitted by the middle of June, and that's because verified applications are not actually sent to medical schools until the end of June. There are several ways that letters of recommendation are sent to AMCAS. Number one, your college may send them. So some colleges have letter packets, or they have a composite letter that includes letters of recommendation, or they send your letters together with the committee letter. So sometimes your college will collect these letters on your behalf and they'll send them off to the medical schools, and you're done. You don't have to worry about it. Other people may have their letter writers upload their letters of recommendation directly to AMCAS, and they can download a letter request form from AMCAS. They give that to the letter writer. The letter writer uses that to access the system and to upload the letter. The final way that people are going to collect letters is through a letter dossier service. The most common letter dossier service is Intrafolio. This is the one that we recommend. And letter writers will send their letters to Intrafolio. Intrafolio holds those letters, and then when you're actually ready to apply to medical school, you then use Intrafolio to send those letters to your through the application service. So those are sort of the main ways to send your letters of recommendation. Since we're talking about letters of recommendation, let's go ahead and answer another one. When should you get your recommendations if you plan on taking a gap year or two? So the best strategy for this, now keep in mind, when you apply to medical school, you want at least 2 STEM letters. So you want at least 2 science letters, and you ideally want 1 non-science letter. So the best strategy is to request those letters before you graduate. You can ask the letter writer what their comfort level is. Maybe you ask them to write a letter for you, just in case. Sometimes when students, take a year or two, they have a year or two gap year, and then they go back and they ask their letter writers for those letters of recommendation. Sometimes they can't find that professor. Sometimes that professor may barely remember them. So the best strategy is to ask for that letter of recommendation before you graduate. If your college holds the letters, great, have your college hold the letters. Otherwise, you have them send that letter to a letter dossier service like Intrafolio. And then during your gap year or years, you keep in touch with those professors. You keep them updated. What are you doing? How are you doing? Maybe you even talk to them once a year, right? So they feel invested in your success, and so you don't lose touch with them. And that way, when it comes time to actually apply to medical school, you can then potentially ask those professors to write an updated letter of recommendation with a date that is closer to when you're actually applying to medical school. And perhaps that letter will also include some more recent information that can be included in the letter of recommendation. So that sort of is a general strategy. But please don't wait to identify who those letter writers are going to be a year after or a year or two after you graduate. I can tell you we've worked with students and they've done that. And sometimes it can be very, very difficult to obtain those letters. Okay, I'm going to go back to the Facebook groups. We got a lot of good questions there. Sorry. Okay. This is a good question because it's going to address a lot of other questions that people have, I know. Okay. Do research courses taken for credit, biochem, for a grade count towards BCPM? Yes. So a biology or chemistry or physics class, biochemistry, is most definitely going to count towards the BCPM GPA. Some of you may ask, what is the BCPM GPA? In medical school admissions, your GPA is looked at in three ways. The BCPM GPA, which is basically your STEM GPA, biochem, physics, math, your all other GPA, which are courses that are not biochem, physics, math, and then your total GPA, so all of your classes together. The BCPM GPA for medical schools is very, very important because as a medical student, you are going to be engaged in a very, very rigorous, scientifically based curriculum. All right, so you want your STEM GPA, your BCPM GPA, to ideally be 3.6 or higher. Have we worked with students who have lower GPAs than that and they've gotten into medical school, allopathic medical schools even successfully? Absolutely. But that should sort of be your target. All right. In terms of which courses are designated BCPM, the Association of American Medical Colleges does put out a listing of all the classes that are BCPM. But at this point, disciplines and courses have just become so complex that you sometimes need to actually check with your undergraduate college for how that course is going to be designated, especially if it's an interdisciplinary course that may have several designations. So you can check with your college, how is this course designated? And that's going to help you to kind of determine how AMCAS is going to calculate your BCPM GPA. If you still have questions after talking to your college about a course designation, then you can call the AMC, you can call AMCAS to ask them how a specific course is going to be designated when they actually go through your grades and they calculate all your GPAs. Really great questions tonight. This is a great question. Okay, for Texas medical schools, minimum of 3 letters are required. Is there a need for a non-science letter of recommendation? This varies from medical school to medical school. So not every medical school is going to have the same letter of recommendation requirements. And some medical schools are also going to have limits on the number of letters of recommendation that they want to see from you. So I would advise you to contact those medical schools or to look on their websites to see what their specific letter of recommendation requirements are. I am fairly certain that there are Texas medical schools who are going to require a non-STEM letter of recommendation. But yeah, I'm actually going to look that up tomorrow because I need to refresh my memory on that. So thank you. Okay. Yes. Is biochemistry counts towards BCPM GPA because it's optional for some medical schools. Okay, so when we are looking at the medical school requirements, and there is a PDF that I can dig up and I can actually post it in the group either tonight after we're done or tomorrow, that outlines all of the requirements for every single medical school. The best resource is that document or the MSAR, which is the medical school admissions requirements. Every medical school has its own requirements. There are some schools that don't have any absolute requirements. There's some medical schools that use competency-based admissions, right? So for those students, for example, who let's say have AP credits from all of their basic sciences and don't want to take any of those basic sciences, which is something we don't recommend, by the way, they in theory can go to one of these medical schools that has competency-based admissions because they don't have any firm prerequisites. So there are going to be some medical schools that do require biochemistry, but not all of them. We do recommend that students take biochemistry for the MCAT and before the MCAT. So, whether or not sort of your medical school that, you really want to go to requires biochem or not is most definitely a course that we recommend students take without question. Okay, this is a good question. It's nice to see so many of you here tonight. Okay, hold on. I'm just going to post this one. Okay. If you get more shadowing hours after you submit the MD applications, can you add these shadowing hours to your profile? So let me answer that first. Once you submit your application, you can't make any changes. But the great thing that AMCAS did in particular is they added anticipated hours. So if you know that after you submit your application, you're going to be shadowing physicians, let's say over the upcoming summer or in the fall, you can put those down as anticipated hours. This is a fabulous feature because in the past, it felt like students weren't really getting credit for things that were happening after they submitted. Once you submit your application, that's it. You can't go back. You can't modify it. You can't add anything. But we encourage our students, for medical schools that allow it, we encourage them to send the schools update letters when they have significant accomplishments. What defines significant depends in part on the student. Okay, now let's answer the second part of this question. How does the GPA verification process work? Do you need to prepare official transcripts from current college and high school? Wonderful question. When you are filling out your application, you need to enter every single college course that you have ever taken and the grade you received. So when you're filling out those applications, we want you to have your transcripts by your side because it is very important that everything matches up. When the verification process happens by AMCAS, there is literally somebody who is sitting there and looking at your application and comparing that to a transcript and making sure that everything lines up. When things don't line up, that is what causes delays. So any college class you've ever taken should be on your AMCAS, and you should have a transcript so you know how that course is listed and you know the grade received. Then AMCAS literally will sit there, will compare everything, and will calculate your GPA. That's how it works. Good question. Oh, yeah, this is a good question. Is there a DO equivalent for the MSAR? So, no, I really wish there were. So the MSAR, again, is the medical school admissions requirements put out by the AMC. There is a wealth of information. It's an online resource. I encourage all of you to get it if you are considering applying to medical school. there is a daunting amount of information there. So just, just be aware of that. I did make a video, which is still a relevant video, probably a couple of years ago now, on YouTube, that takes you through the MSAR, sort of walks you through how to kind of navigate the MSAR. So you can get some help that way. The MSAR, AMC also has videos about this as well, I'm sure. So, but no, as far as I know, there is not a DO equivalent. Should a 5.9 GPA 505 MCAT focus on DO? If retake MCAT in August after applying, can you send a new scores and update? All right, so this is an interesting question. So a 3.59 GPA and a 505 MCAT, for the most part, for most students with those metrics, the focus is going to be on osteopathic medical schools. There are exceptions, however, and one of those exceptions is going to depend on what state you're from. When you start looking at average MCATs, you're going to see certain state schools that have really, I don't want to say low, because a 505 is an outstanding score in my opinion. Relatively speaking, they have lower scores than some other medical schools. Those are mostly state schools, however. So if you're from a state where the state school has a fairly low average MCAT, we might advise you to try for that medical school. Depending on what demographic group you are from, we might also recommend that you still try applying to some allopathic medical schools. I can tell you this year alone, we had students with MCATs in the 505 range who were accepted to allopathic medical schools, but they fell within those types of categories. All right. But for the most part, for the majority of students with a 505 MCAT, not the 3.6 GPA, because a 3.6 GPA, depending on what the trend was, depending on which courses sort of were lower, which courses were higher, were those the weeder classes, how did the student do, and the upper level classes, what was the trend? There are different things that we look at when we're looking at the GPA. And at a lot of schools, there's also grade inflation now. So in some ways, the GPA is becoming less significant, we think we're observing, than the MCAT. But again, there are a lot of factors that, that we're looking at when we're making that determination. But depending, I would not absolutely rule out allopathic schools with these metrics, but probably for most students, we'd be advising them to really be focusing on osteopathic. Now, if you take an MCAT in August, this makes for a somewhat tricky situation, because when a medical school sees that you have a future MCAT date, they are not necessarily going to review your application. They're going to wait to review your application until that August MCAT score comes in. So an August MCAT score is not coming in until September. So let's say you just had a really bad day when you took the MCAT and earned a 505, and you go in August and you get a 517, right? You get an amazing, amazing high MCAT score. The issue is that at that point, your application's not being looked at until September. And at that point, you are a late applicant. For this reason, we do not recommend taking an August MCAT. If you're going to retake the MCAT, we would advise you to postpone the application and, to take the MCAT in August if you're ready, or give yourself the luxury of more time and, just push it off by a year. Okay. This is a good question. Does your chance of acceptance to medical school increase? Sorry, I'm editing as I'm reading. Increase if you are in a private school, private college versus a public college. Are there any statistics showing acceptances from private versus public colleges? All right, so this is an interesting question. It's a great question, and it's something that we talk about a lot around this time of year, especially as the new batch of graduating seniors, class of 2024, high school students are trying to decide where they should go to college. So acceptance rates at elite, just for lack of a better word, elite private universities are going to be very high. students don't, those schools don't have these incredibly high acceptance rates because of the school where the student is. These schools have these amazing acceptance rates because their applicant pool, their student body is so impressive and so ambitious and so bright. So you have to look at this data with a grain of salt. When a certain top tier elite college tells you 90% of our students are getting into medical school, first of all, you want to know which medical schools they're getting into. And secondly, they're drawing from a very, very talented pool of students. Okay. Versus a public school. Usually, public schools are going to have much more diverse student bodies in terms of ability, in terms of motivation. And so I would expect public universities to have lower overall acceptance rates than elite private universities. For that reason, I can tell you it does not matter where you go to college when it comes to applying to medical school. If you take advantage of every single opportunity available to you at state university, state public university, and you get a 520 on your MCAT, you are going to be just as competitive as the student who went to elite university, took advantage of every opportunity, and got a 520 on the MCAT. So the MCAT allows medical schools to compare apples to apples. And so this is why you really need to think really hard when you're deciding where you want to go to college. I can also tell you that there are some colleges that are, very, very difficult in terms of those weeder classes. It's very, very hard to get good grades. It can be very discouraging for bright students to be at those schools where they feel like they're really struggling to get those A's or even B's. So these are all things that you need to weigh when you're deciding where you want to go to college. Okay. All right, hold on. Oh, thank you so much. I'm happy you learned from my videos. I know I should be doing more videos, and I wish I had more time to do them. Okay, let me just see. Okay, I'm going to answer a residency question just because I feel like we don't get a lot of residency questions. And, we work with a lot of residency applicants. So, okay. All right. So can you comment on the residency match rate for PM&R for MD? It seems so low at 52%, less than even the most competitive residencies. How do you assess and determine what a starting M3 in June should be doing to maximize his chances in the field based on these stats? Okay, so when I would have to go back and specifically look at the PM&R match rate. I did glance at the PM&R because when we had those statistics come out, I was reviewing them, and I'm pretty sure that there were just fewer allopathic applicants who applied to PM&R. So based on my interpretation of the data, and again, I need to go back and make sure that, because I didn't analyze it very carefully. I think that there were fewer allopathic applicants to PM&R, which is physical medicine and rehabilitation. And so it's possible that you're interpreting the data because of that. And the only reason I remember that is because I was also struck by the numbers. And I thought to myself, wow, like, why are there so few allopathic students applying for PM&R? And it seemed like there were many more osteopathic medical students applying for PM&R. So something that we definitely see in the residency match process is that, trends change, right? So you can have a specialty that, 1 year is, really, really popular and the next year isn't, so we really look at those trends. But, I think I'm going to go back and specifically look at PM&R. So if you want to follow up in the residency group with a question about that, I'd be happy to answer it. And as far as what a third-year medical student should be doing to be competitive for whatever specialty they want to go into, the student needs to be somewhat strategic if they have the flexibility in terms of deciding when they're going to have all of their rotations, because during your third year, you do your core rotations in family medicine, internal medicine, pediatrics, psychiatry, surgery, OBGYN. I think I lost one. If you're following me, please let me know what I forgot. Psychiatry. Did I say psychiatry? Anyway, and so PM&R is really going to be an elective rotation at the vast majority of medical schools. So you want to, it's more going to be about structuring your fourth year if you want to go into a specialty that you're not getting exposure to during the third year, because it's not a core rotation in the third year. There are some medical schools, however, that are going to have some elective rotations in the third year. And so you ideally, if the student has that opportunity, then I would think it would be most strategic to have that elective like beyond the halfway point in the year, because I can tell you at the beginning of third year, some students are really nervous. They don't know how to use the computer system. They're just kind of getting their feet wet. They're learning about, how to be a medical student, in the hospital with responsibilities. So you want to probably do that after the first half of the year, if that's possible. Okay, Casper. Let's talk about Casper. So Casper, first of all, is a situational judgment test. When pre-meds, I was talking to a student just yesterday. When pre-meds and their parents hear the word test, it just causes immediate anxiety. Casper is not a test. It's not like the MCAT. It doesn't carry the weight of like a test like the MCAT or the SAT or the ACT. It is a situational judgment test where you are given scenarios and you need to sort of, talk your way through those scenarios and answer some questions related to those scenarios. The Casper test, if you are applying to a good range of medical schools, is probably going to be required or recommended by at least a few of your medical schools. We do have a course for our students, and last year we created that course because there was so much demand for it, because students all want to be able to prepare for a test. So we created a course, and our students did phenomenally well on Casper. But this is not a test that I encourage you to spend hours and hours and hours of time preparing for. In fact, the materials that are offered by Altus Suite, which is the company that creates Casper and administers Casper, I think for most students are going to be sufficient. But again, just because there was demand and our students really wanted us to have more materials for them, we created those materials for them. But most likely, if you are applying broadly, which is what we encourage students to do to guarantee their success in the medical school admissions process, it is most likely that at least a few of your schools are going to require Casper. Okay. Do you have any idea about Texas medical schools MCAT for MD colleges? The Texas medical schools, there is a huge variation in terms of the average MCATs for Texas medical schools. We do have an article on our website about Texas medical schools where I believe we outline those general trends. But there's a lot of variation in Texas. I mean, you have some state medical schools which, are going to have, again, I don't like the word low because the MCAT is just such a mammoth test. I think anyone who can prepare for that exam, take that exam, and, score in the 70th percentile or higher is amazing. But there are going to be some schools that have lower scores and some schools that have higher scores in Texas. There definitely is a big range amongst Texas MD allopathic medical schools. And yes, we work with a ton of Texas students. We work with a ton of, Texas students who go to college outside of state. We work with a ton of Texas students who go to Texas colleges as well. So we know a lot about the Texas medical schools. Phenomenal options in Texas. It's a great place to practice medicine, I think. Okay, and to learn about medicine too. All right, let me just see what other questions we have here. Great mix of questions today. Um, sorry, I'm just sort of scrolling to see what questions are here. Okay, I'm going to put this question up, even though it's sort of there's not there's not going to be one great answer, but I'm just going to see how I do with this. Okay, hold on. Where did it go? Ooh. Okay. What are the 5 components in your resume in order a medical school to look at to determine if you're the best fit for their school? Okay, this is tough. First of all, every medical school has its own mission. Those missions, if you look at them, are going to be very, very similar at a lot of schools. Some medical schools are also going to have, their specific institutional priorities. So, for example, if you look at UC Davis is the majority of students at UC Davis are first generation underrepresented minorities. So there are definitely some schools that have very, very specific ideas of what they want in their medical school student body. There are some schools that focus on rural medicine. So if you don't have any interest in rural medicine, or you haven't don't have any evidence for interest in rural medicine, regardless of what you say in your application, you may not be a great applicant for that medical school. If we're thinking sort of more generically, if I could tell you the 5 things that sort of would appeal to most medical schools, it's going to be, and not necessarily in this order, right? Because every applicant has their own interests, and I can tell you that most applicants never sort of have the same degree or the same amount of types of experiences. There's always sort of a uniqueness to every single applicant. But I would say research. I would say some type of leadership. That can be a formal role, or it can be initiative. There are many, many different ways to demonstrate leadership. I would say a commitment to understanding people who have backgrounds that are different than your own. So through community service, through advocacy type of work. I would say clinical work and or clinical exposure. Again, depending on what your experiences are, you're either going to have lots of clinical work, some clinical work, or no clinical work. We have had students this year who've gotten into some of the most competitive medical schools in the country who never worked clinically. They had clinical exposure, they had community service, but they never actually worked clinically. And I just feel like a lot of what I'm hearing these days is students and parents are very, very, very focused on clinical work. And I feel like sometimes that's taking away from focus on other experiences that are equally or as important depending on what your niche is. And then far and away, medical schools, the number one thing that they are most interested in and concerned about is your academic aptitude. They're looking at your grades, they're looking at your MCAT, and they want to know that you're going to succeed in this very, very rigorous, scientifically based curriculum. So that really always is number one. It was great seeing everyone tonight. I'm so sorry that I did not get to everybody's questions. I try to get to as many as I can. But this was a great Q&A, and I thank you all so much for being here. Again, if you are not yet a part of our Facebook group, please join. And if you are interested in learning more about us, again, we are working with students right now for the next application year for the 2024-2025 cycle. And if you're interested in working with us, or if you're even just you're a rising freshman, you've just decided where you're going to college, and you want someone to help you through your first year of medical school, your first year of college in preparation for medical school, we'd be happy to do that. Or if you're a medical student who's interested in help getting a residency match, we'd be happy to work with you as well. I will not be here next week. I apologize for that, but I will see you the following week. So we will have 1 week off, but I hope to see all of you again on the Facebook group, and I look forward to seeing all of you in 2 weeks. Okay. All right. Have a great night. Bye-bye.